I wanted to start this program again. I would have talked about this last week, given the opportunity, but I thought it was important. There was a big story last week talking about the $400 million anonymous donation uh, plugged into the Foundation for Excellence. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and for going to kind of segue at one point to a little bit of a FFE 101 for folks. We haven't talked about this on the show in a while, but it is something we've talked about on the show quite a bit. So before I do that, let's I want to give y'all a little bit of context. This is a really good article from the Gazette or M Live. Who donated $400 million to Kalamazoo, and does the public have a right to know? And this is written by Brad Devereaux. It was updated August 4th. Just goes on to talk about the $400 million gift was given to the city of Kalamazoo, which is going to be $40 million over the next decade. And city officials have said only the funds are coming from longtime community members who choose to remain anonymous. So we don't know for certain who the source of this record-setting donation is. And I want to read a little bit. This is a quote from David Benak, who ran for Congress and for mayor in 2019. And he's I'm going to read a little bit from his statement, and then I kind of want to expand on it. He questioned city leaders calling the donors anonymous. If some at the city gave the money, and according to city officials, they do. The political and business leaders of the city know who they are, Benak said. So in that sense, anonymous doesn't matter because anybody who can be influenced or can exert influence with this money knows who it's from. It's just anonymous to lowly Kalamazoo citizens. The group of people who have the inside information is not a group wants to be in, Benak said, because it is destructive to democracy and to the morale of the people of the city. I want people to have trust in our government, and I think that this is exactly the kind of thing that makes that impossible. So let's rewind a bit. So the FFE is about 4 years old at this point. It was incorporated in 2017. For my parts, I was part of a group, Kalamazoo for Revolution at the time, that really pushed a lot on that particular transparency hinge. And again, let me do a little bit of a FFE 101. Maybe you're just tuning into the program. Maybe you're unfamiliar with some of our older critiques and observations about the Foundation for Excellence. So going all the way back to 2015, there was this Blue Ribbon Commission, I think even maybe a little bit before that, to try to figure out how to solve Kalamazoo's longstanding budget crisis. You know, this is a problem that has been happening cities all over the country. It has a longer drawn-out explanation talking about offshoring of jobs and just the tax base for a lot of these manufacturing cities, just like Kalamazoo used to be. You know, a lot of stuff used to get made here, guitars, paper, etc. Just no longer is there. So how do you maintain municipal functions when you don't have enough of a tax base to draw on to fund all that stuff? So the initial, one of the initial things that was tossed around, particularly by commissioners at the time, Matt Milzeric, was a progressive income tax, which in layman's is taxing the rich, which again we've talked a lot about on the show is fair, it's equitable, it's asking, particularly at Kalamazoo, an area that has a strange amount of billionaires per capita compared to most cities of our size, asking them to pay their fair share of taxes so that our city would be funded in perpetuity. And behind the scenes, it was basically strangled to death by a lot of the big business and elite entities here in the city of Kalamazoo. One that comes to mind, Southwest Michigan First, was very, very adamant and against the idea of a progressive income tax. A lot of talk was had of we've referred to the term before on the show of capital flight or a capital strike. The idea being like, if you tax us at a level which is actually fairly appropriate, then it might cause businesses to flee the city. It might cause wealthy interests to flee the city. If you read between the lines, it's basically a thinly veiled threat. Like, if you go after our purses, we will draw the purse strings and mosey on out, make our money unavailable to the city to tax. So what happens instead? We have people like Bobby Hopewell, Mayor Anderson, Bill Johnston, Bill Parfett, Ron Kitchen, Southwest Michigan First, come up with this idea, the Foundation for Excellence, which is, and it's funny because like the local media rarely frames it this way, and certainly the city government doesn't. It's like, oh, it's this unprecedented thing where the benevolent, wealthy philanthropists of this city just want to just out of the goodness of their hearts give the city a whole bunch of money. And here's the crux of the problem with that, as we've talked about a lot on our program, is again, there was an option on the table on the outset that was, there's nothing more time tested than just taxing the wealthy. Again, going back to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, even up until the 80s before Reagan, it was far more common to tax the wealthiest among us to help fund our municipal resources, infrastructure, etc. But billionaires in Kalamazoo did not want that. They wanted this program, Foundation for Excellence, where billionaires are directly subsidizing the city budget. I really, that bears repeating. The billionaires in Kalamazoo directly subsidize the city budget rather than being taxed. Now, this is very strange. If you wonder, it's like, why wouldn't you just consent to being taxed? And there's this whole. I'm not going to go into the infrastructure of the Foundation for Excellence, although that is publicly available. I really recommend. I know it's dry reading, but check out the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. You get a better sense of how this structurally functions. So there's this board. It's chosen by the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. It's stakeholders from the community, but it's really critical to understand that you wouldn't build this foundation in the first place unless you wanted to get around taxation. Why would you want to get around taxation? Well, it gives you more control. When you control literally the purse strings of the city government, then you are going to have an outsized impact on how that decision making is made. Now, granted, since the creation of the foundation, there's been a lot of pushback as far as like getting more transparency, citizen control. I actually do give a good degree of compliment to the Imagine Kalamazoo survey, which was fairly comprehensive, did a lot of work getting input about how people wanted the money spent. But there is kind of this invisible veto. And that's something that like David Benak is kind of referring to, which is the idea that, if only, certain people in the Kalamazoo city government, like say Mayor Anderson, former Mayor Hopewell, Ritzema, Clyde Robinson, if there's only like a small number of people who really know who is giving the money to do this, then those conversations are happening privately. They are not happening, and granted, like even in this article, they talk about like how it's like, well, our foundation meetings are as open. We even won an award for being transparent and having open meetings about this, because that's true. But at the very root of it, when the donors themselves are anonymous and only certain people in Kalamazoo's power structure know who those people are, well, that creates a whole litany of problems around like, well, at the end of the day, these people can consent or not to giving their money over if they like or dislike what is going on in the city. So let me just throw out a random example. So let's say we get like some radical socialists in the city government. They really wants to. They're like, okay, we're going to buy this land, turn it around, of this land that maybe certain interests want to turn into a arena that nobody wants. Literally, citizens of Kalamazoo batted down that idea several times. It's still getting built. Let's say it's like, okay, we're going to expropriate that land. We're going to turn it over for homeless. Somebody from Southwest Michigan first who is really, really invested in getting that arena built. They make a few phone calls to some of these anonymous donors. All of a sudden, some conversations happen, and like, oh wait, looks like the arena is getting built anyway. That's really not too far from reality. Because again, like the arena is getting built despite years of pushback and citizens of the city saying we don't want this. And there's always going to be that problem at the root of it that you would not have if you had, at the beginning, just taxed the rich. A very simple and elegant solution to a problem as old as time. So, under this veil of philanthropy, we've given the billionaire class veto power over the, like, kind of invisible veto power over the functions of the city government. Now, that is a reality we need to keep in check. Now, also looking at like, okay, so how has that played out? And that's important to look at too. Some of the worst fears that, people like me in 2015, 2016, 2017 were throwing out there haven't necessarily materialized, but we have, oh, sorry. We have really seen what's happened when the foundation has been stress tested. Good examples of the COVID pandemic. So we do a lot of those, let's say, money has been going into eviction diversion. That is a good thing. And it's important to look at, like again, a lot of anti-capitalists and socialists and anarchists that I know, they can paint very broad brushstrokes and talk about like the bourgeoisie in Kalamazoo, but it's important to look at like what is the composition of Kalamazoo's so-called class, and a big component of that is, if the power structure of the city was a little bit different, the COVID pandemic would have been a perfect opportunity for some mass eviction and mass gentrification, because there are a lot of powerful interests in Kalamazoo who want that. But it's important to look at, okay, what's the difference between those invested in real estate versus these handful of billionaires in the city that largely bankroll the foundation? And you'll find that a lot of the real estate interests in Kalamazoo are from outside the city, and most of the billionaires are homegrown. So you have competing capitalist interests there. The outside of the city real estate people, they might be more in their interest to get people evicted, but the kind of philanthropic wing, Kalamazoo's ruling class, it's more in their interest to do these programs that it's the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. By investing in these programs, it again makes them look good, makes the foundation look good, and at the end of the day, it's kind of like drawing in more of that elements of again, they're trying to bring in kind of like upwardly mobile, like liberal type people into Kalamazoo, and making sure that like these things are done that do make our city look humane. That's important. Now, that might sound really cynical to a lot of you. It's like, well, sorry. These are still a lot of the same people who, they created the Kalamazoo Promise, which, helps people. I myself got money from the Promise. That's true. At the same time, the Promise is in degrees different than the city budget, but I'm not going to go into all that. Point of it being, there's this kind of buy-in to the idea that Kalamazoo has a benevolent billionaire class. Its philanthropy is good-hearted, and these structural problems I bring up about like the invisible veto are just like me being a Marxist worrywarts or a perpetual cynic. Well, let's dig into that. You need to understand that at the end of the day, these people have more class solidarity than they do with, like, say, the city of Kalamazoo, or the working class of Kalamazoo, I should say. Because even though they are doing these things that can concretely assist people in crisis or help draw in, get people to college. Let's look at how that's actually used. By the way, there's a long-standing critique about the promise, about how it's drawn in more middle-class people, and there hasn't been a lot of push to help people who already live here take advantage of that. Granted, some people on the ground have reversed that trend, much to their credit. But here's a very good recent example of this. So Southwest Michigan First, which again pushed the FFE, and it's kind of one of those, you want to look at where the power really is in the city of Kalamazoo. Southwest Michigan First is one of those places. And, they created headlines at the beginning of this year, selecting a very right-wing reactionary person to be his successor to Ron Kitchens. And this caught a lot of people by surprise. And to the credit of a lot of the liberal nonprofits in Kalamazoo, everybody kind of created a uniform block and put significant pressure on Southwest Michigan First to where Lee Chatfield had to resign. But I think it's a pertinent example. The ruling class of Kalamazoo, left to its own devices, will seek out people that align with its corporate interests rather than the kind of ideological ethics that a lot of Kalamazoo liberals hold near and dear to their hearts. They sought out a guy who was stoking lies about BLM and Antifa and is transphobic, homophobic, etc., because of his business ties and acumen and his excitement about getting the arena built. So never forget that. Without that public pressure, left to their own devices, the ruling class of Kalamazoo was going to let a young fasci adjacent doofus basically run the power center, the power core of Kalamazoo capitalism. By the way, actually, I don't know, calling Lee Chatfield the fasci adjacent, maybe that's a little harsh. But I don't know. Frankly, people who spread lies about BLM or say that Antifa are the real fascists, if you're not a fascist yourself, you're at least being a useful idiot for fascists. So, there's that. So $400 million. From whom? Again, the real terrible thing is we don't know. And I do think the citizens of Kalamazoo, at the very least, have a right to know. If we have to live in this weird, it really is a big kind of a billionaire experiment petri dish. Then yeah, I think at the very least we should know who's donating, and we know the two founding donors, which was Bill Johnston and William Parfett. Again, one a Wall Street guy, one former board of Monsanto and a big GOP bigwig. So again, these again, a lot of Kalamazoo's progressivism, or the progressivism of Kalamazoo's billionaires, I should say, is often not cosmetic than anything else. But again, even in the language of the articles of corporation, they reference building capital. And I think we shouldn't forget, at the end of the day, these billionaires are, they appreciate the good PR, and I do think a lot of them, they're human beings. They do genuinely want to help people, but against their own interests, no. If they wanted to help people to that extent, they just would have, paid their damn taxes. So that's something you should always remember when things like the Foundation for Excellence come up. And, it's worth considering, there's a handful of people in the city, the strikers, people associated with Pfizer Upjohn, again, the Parfets, etc. Again, these billionaires are getting a lot of goodwill. Some of them are very bad actors. I mean, in an article we're going to talk about later in the show, Pfizer is price gouging over in the EU, literally putting profit before people's lives. So, it's worth remembering that this kind of worship of philanthropy that happens in Kalamazoo. It's a very intentional cultural construct we have here at the local level, because again, the billionaires would rather be praised for giving gifts to the city rather than just be taxed in a way that would have the utmost transparency and the utmost control. Again, if money is flowing directly into the city through taxation, then it literally is just the city, its elected officials that get to decide how that money is spent, and you don't have this sort of invisible veto or the specter of capital strikes, capital flight, kind of, there is a ghost haunting Kalamazoo, specter haunting Kalamazoo. But don't forget that money is important, but the wheels that make Kalamazoo turn are the people working downtown in restaurants, janitors, keeping our universities clean, the mental health professionals, keeping people taken care of in our city, the bus drivers, the landscapers, etc., etc. So, in a way, another way to frame it is I look at I call it the revolution tax. So when the local billionaires do things like help eviction deferral programs to make sure that poor working people in the city don't get too upset, too desperate, because if they do, it's like you should have paid your revolution tax. So always keep in mind, while the billionaires in Kalamazoo have this very unique funding mechanism and control over the city, ultimately, it doesn't need a pile of guano compared to the power that the working people in Kalamazoo have. As Big Bill Haywood once said, if the workers just put their hands in their pockets, you got the capitalist class whooped. And that's why we do our show. That's why we always encourage organizers on the program, because that kind of education, that kind of organizing is integral, important, and especially parceling out these next few decades, years. I think these contradictions are only going to become more intense. And again, as the contradictions become more intense, talking in all the Marxist razzmatazz, it's going to be more and more difficult for the billionaire class to maintain that control, and it's going to become more and more obvious to the working class of the city of Kalamazoo that we really need to put our feet on the ground in determining our own future. Kind of echoing some sentiments I had when I ran for city commission back in 2019. There's really two pathways the city could take in the upcoming decades. I think we can become a gated apartheid community for the rich, or we could become a safe haven for workers, and particularly climate refugees around the world. That kind of ties into how this particular region, Goldilocks zone, I don't want to go into a thing about that, climate change, but Kalamazoo is incredibly important for the future of not only ourselves, but in a very big way, the world. As much as the working class of Kalamazoo can realize that to an extent, I think the billionaires kind of have, the better prepared we will be for the tumultuous times ahead of us. So I'm going to take a quick little break. Y'all are listening to the Hood Rat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Again, you can find our full episodes on our Facebook page, and please tune into Wider every Saturday from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. To hear our show on the radio. We're going to be changing format a little bit in the fall. Hopefully, we'll be going back to live in the studio stuff. And after that, you'll be hearing us more in podcast form. We'll be focusing on some different stuff, and we're going to be doing a name change. I'll talk a little bit about that more towards the end of the show. Y'all listening to the Hood Rat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR. your only source for political revolution.